What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So today I'm finally back to work on this car. I haven't wanted to do anything to it since STPR. It's only been a couple weeks since then, but I got to get back into working on it so that I could finish it enough to actually start on my next project. So today we're going to be making some reinforced rocker panels and finally finishing up the rear pin stand mounts, because I did the fronts when I did the cage, so it was the very first thing that I did. So that was almost a year ago, so we definitely need to get that knocked out, and then we're going to make some pin stands, but probably not in this video. We'll save that for the next one. So here's what I'm going to be using to actually plate the rocker panels. So this is some super thick stuff. This is 2.5 by 2.5 inch angle iron, and I believe I got it in 3/16. And yeah, this is going to be plating my rocker panels right here. So pretty much going to go, I actually have a small piece that I can use to show you. All right, so here's a small piece that I have. So it's pretty much going to be going on there just like that. Obviously, I'm going to kind of straighten out my rocker panels a little bit more, get it to sit a little flatter. And the piece is going to span all the way from the front to the rear of the rocker panels. And that's going to make for a lot stronger of a rocker panel, because as you can see, that thing is beat up. So I have high centered quite a few times on that. That's completely smashed out. The pinch welds are all sorts of folded up here. They don't really do a good job anymore. So I need a good jack point from all sides of the car, and that will serve as a pretty good jack point once I weld this in there. And also you can see my front pin stand hole that I made a long time ago. I never painted it, so it's super rusted. I'm gonna have to clean it up quite a bit. And this is literally just a place that you make like permanent jack stands that slot into here. And it sets the car at a certain height, and it really locks it into place, so you don't have to worry about jacking up the car and having unstable jack stands and wobbling on unstable ground. So like when we were doing service at STPR, the ground was super unstable there, and it was really sketchy when we had to weld the exhaust underneath the car, because it was definitely moving quite a bit, and cheap jack stands that I have from Harbor Freight don't really do a very good job anyway. So pin stands will eliminate the need for all of that, and they lock into place, make the car super secure. I'll go more into what they actually look like and how you make them, obviously, when I make that video. But for now, we're going to start working on this and get the rocker panels plated and make the rear mounts for the pin stands. So we're going to start on the passenger side because the other side has the rust, and I don't feel like fixing that right now, and I got to go grab sheet metal anyway. So we're going to get the length that we need from about right here where the fender ends, so the fender can still be removable, and go all the way back to the end of the rocker panel, and then start fitting that piece up once we cut it, and figure out exactly where we're going to put this rear pin stand hole in. Since the rocker panel is so smashed up in certain areas, like back here and here in the middle, I really think that I'm just going to kind of like make it a little bit more uniform. So right here it still has its normal shape, but everywhere else it's really sandwiched up. So I'm just going to make this to where it kind of matches that. That way it's easier to fit. So I'm just going to probably smash up a little bit more of this. Really didn't want to do that, but there's really no way that I can pull all of these areas back out into their normal shape. So it would be easier if I just did this and made this part conform to all the other areas, because then it'll be more level and easier to weld. So we're ready to notch this first section for the old pin stand that I already have in the car. So I just kind of roughly marked it. I am going to try to use a hole saw to try to get the hole as close as possible, and then just use probably a grinding disc just to like open up the hole enough. That way I can get it close and try to make it look as best as possible, because I didn't do a very good job. I wish I'd waited till I did all of this to do the pin stands, because then I could have placed those a little bit lower, and it would have looked better. And I also used a huge tube. I shouldn't have used 1.5-inch tube. Yeah, I don't know why I went so big. Easily could have went like 1.25 inch for the pin stand mount, and then that would have meant that I would have just had to do like a 1-inch tube going into it, because that's plenty strong enough if you do a 120 wall with a support. So yeah, oh well, they'll just be massive holes. Not a big deal. It should look a little better though once I actually notch this out and we can get this piece on there. So massage the crap out of the rock panel some more. Finally got this thing to sit. So this area is very caved in where the original pin stand mount went. So I had to smash in quite a bit of the center because it wasn't laying very flat against it. And I'm going to have to weld this up completely on the top because I don't want moisture to get in. Either that or I got to use a bunch of seam sealer, so one or the other. I might still massage a little bit more of it because it does have a pretty big gap down in some of these areas. Yeah, I don't know. I'm probably going to play with it some more because I don't want to just have to fill in a decent sized gap, because this is a pretty big gap that I'm going to have to fill. I could always use seam sealer and just stitch weld it and then use seam sealer throughout all of it. But even then would probably not keep it waterproof enough. And I really don't want like water to collect on the inside, because then this thing's just going to rust really bad. It's going to take a while because it is pretty thick, but it still will get pretty bad. Alright, we are going to start drilling out the hole for the second pin stand in the rear over here. So we're going to drill it out of the angle iron first. That way it's easier to line up on the car and I don't have to put the hole in the car and then try to line up this with it and then end up making the hole in the wrong spot, because that would just be a pain. So we're going to do this and then we can start actually mounting the tube into the car, which I have my long hole saw for. I'll show you guys that in a minute once we actually drill this out. So here's my fancy hole saw that I made. It's literally just an 1.5 inch tube welded in the center of the 1.5 inch hole saw. So I made this a while ago. The hardest part was just trying to get it straight. Just TIG welded it and then grinded it all smooth. Works pretty good. Probably gonna have to make a different one for whenever I decide to make another car and I don't do these gigantic pin stands. And if you break any of the teeth on these things, obviously you gotta make a new one every single time that you ruin this hole saw. So it's good to go slow so you don't have to remake it. But I'm just gonna go through to the other side of the sheet metal over here. And then we'll just weld it in. So I'm not going to go all the way through the car because I just don't want to have to deal with plugging up the other side of the hole once I get in there. I already went through like 3 levels of sheet metal, so that's plenty. And it's going to have this huge plate on the outside that's going to distribute the load, so not really worried about it. So now I can measure and get a distance that I need to make the tube, make it a little bit longer. I can cut it later, but I'm going to cut a section of 1.5 inches to go in here. And then we'll start getting this ready to go on. I'll probably massage this a little bit more to try to get the fitment a little better so I don't have to bridge this huge gap that I've got right now. I don't think that I'm going to weld all the way across. I'll probably just do little strips and then do seam sealer all the way elsewhere, because Even if I weld the whole thing, I know there'll still be like pinholes and little sections that I miss anyway, and it'll look really bad if I do that. So just gonna do small chunks and then seam sealer to fill in all the rest, and try to smooth it out. And then after I do seam sealer, then we'll get a coat of paint. And this is why you run wheel well liners on rally cars, or any car for that matter. Luckily, the Gorilla Tape saved us later on from at least sucking up dirt into the intake. But man, that's just bad. I'm going to have to leave that off and clean it without the fender on, because that's pretty nasty. So this thing is pretty much completely welded on there now. The only thing that I have to do is make little end pieces out of some 1/8 inch for here, so we don't have these big open areas. And I'm just literally gonna like get it rough enough to get some weld on there, weld all the way down on the sides, and then weld it to this, and then trim it from there, so I don't have to make a tiny piece and weld it on there. And then just same thing back here. So some of the welds didn't come out too bad. And then a lot of them came out really bad. I ended up switching out my gun on my welder because I thought that I was getting some issues with that. Wasn't getting any gas flow spontaneously, but then I found out that it was just the feed line coming from my tank was getting pinched between my two argon tanks, or the argon and then the C25 tank. So yeah, I had like super intermittent times when all of a sudden it would just burn through like crazy, had no shielding gas, so came out pretty poor. So I did weld this piece on there fully as well, so I'm gonna have to grind down these welds, make it look flat. I kind of tacked it to try to keep the weld from going on the inside as much as I could. So I still will need to break out my Dremel and clean up a little bit of these edges because I got a little bit of a lip in here. Nothing too bad though, just a little bit that I'll have to get rid of. So next thing, we're gonna make those end caps and weld them on real quick. So I'm going to call it quits for the night, but got these things welded on, the end cap pieces, whatever. So we'll trim them up tomorrow, and then we'll actually weld them to the body too. So we'll finish up all that gap. Not too bad on there. Those welds came out fine. Pretty easy welds though. Welding 3/16 to 3/16, or actually 1/8 inch to 3/16, I think. But yeah, these are good. Yeah, so we'll just trim them up tomorrow. I'm just going to take a pretty much angle grinder to this, clean up the edge, and then grind up that weld so it looks like one solid piece. And then weld it to the car. I'll probably take the wheel off. I probably can get away with just leaving the front wheel on, but got to take the back wheel off to get in there to weld that one up and get a clean cut on there. And I don't want to ruin my nice tires because they're still pretty good and have plenty of life left in them. All right, back to work. So we're going to weld these pieces on to the body right here, clean up these edges so we can get a good weld on there. And then after that, we'll trim these down. So we're gonna cut these edges off, grind the weld smooth, and then chop these tubes off as well. Well, just, I guess that one, because that one's already good. But we'll clean up that one as well, which I would explain in the last clip, but that's what we're doing right now.
Alright, passenger side is pretty much done. We just have to wait for seam sealer to show up and make it look a little bit better, and some paint on there. And I'm probably going to use something with texture that's kind of like a heavier duty. I might use like bedline or something like that. That way it doesn't just chip off like normal spray paint. And obviously it doesn't look very good right now. Hopefully we can make it look a little better. I do still have to clean this up with a Dremel to be able to actually get a tube in there, because that's definitely going to interfere with it. So now we just have to knock out the driver's side, which is the exact same thing and more, because we got rust back here. And I really don't want to bore you guys and put out like a 35-minute long video on this, so we're just going to come back when this is done.
Soon after.
I didn't get much done last night because, as you can see, I got a little wound on my head. The car finally bit back again. It's been a little while since I got hurt working on the car. But I was using the angle grinder, cutting up some pieces for the end caps. So right here, you can see them. Still exactly where I left it. As you can see, there's nothing left of that cutoff wheel at all. Just like little fibers. And there's a little chunk right there, still in the piece of metal. I kind of got binded. I kind of twisted it. Did the wrong thing. There's some pieces on the ground right there. And there's another one over here. So yeah, that resulted in getting whacked in the head and having a few pieces embedded in there. Didn't need stitches or anything, so that's good. Just a little scab now. Got a headache. Not a big deal. So we're going to finish up that side, and I'll continue to just do that without you having to see that. But I did get my seam sealer in today. So we're going to take care of the passenger side with seam sealer, since it will take a little while to set before we can paint it. That way it can set while I'm finishing up the other side for a couple hours, since there's still a little bit more work to do on there. Then once we do that, we can throw some paint on the passenger side and let the seam sealer sit on the driver's side, and then just take turns painting both sides. So it's been a couple days now, and this stuff is dried rock hard, so we can sand it. I really haven't had any time to work on this thing because of work, my real work. So we're going to start off. Got to sand the inside of these, not sand, but actually grind. That way we can fit our pin stands in there. Once we do that, then we'll clean up this seam seal, kind of make it a little bit more smooth, and get rid of all this excess that we don't need on there. And then start taping up everything for paint. So we got some undercoating for it, or actually I think I got truck bed liner coating for it right here. I got a couple cans of this stuff. I don't know how well this stuff works, or even if I'll like it. But I figured I should do something that is somewhat hardy, because it is a spray can, so it can't be too hardy. But hopefully it is, and it can stand up to a little bit of abuse. Since it's on the rocker panels, then obviously those will see quite a bit of abuse. But I think it looks decent. It'll definitely look a lot better once it's painted too. And I'll probably go up like an inch or so above it, probably like to right here, since I burned the shit out of the paint. And then on the inside here, I'll probably go up to this first step in the sill of the door. And yeah, so that'll be fun. Gotta prep all that, which I'm never good at, but we'll do a decent job so that the paint doesn't come out too terribly. And we're not prepping it for paint because this stuff shrunk like crazy and had huge crevices going down. So put another layer on. I'm going to let it dry for probably overnight, and then I'll just sand it tomorrow. Should be dry enough. It just won't be hard like it was, but it should be decent enough to where we can at least sand it smooth-ish and then throw on a coat of paint, because this is turned into like a whole week's worth of work, and it really shouldn't have.
Hey, are you using power tools?
Yes. Always.
Are you going to put your PPE on? Are you?
No. Can I work?
Put your face mask on.
Woman.
Woman! Water plant.
Finally, we're going to finish this up today. It's only been a week. It's pretty much rock hard again. It's still a little soft-ish. It takes like 7 days for this stuff to fully cure. I don't think I'm going to sand it down. Whatever. I did a better job this time of actually making sure that it was pretty smooth when I made it. As you can tell, it's a lot flatter and it's a lot smoother, so I don't have a bunch to get rid of, so I'm not going to. So we're just going to start making preparations for paint. So marking everything, taping up everything that we don't want paint on. And then after that, start sanding everything. Oh, I still need to grind all of these out too. I didn't do that yesterday to make sure that I can actually fit the tube in there. That side's not as bad, but passenger side is much worse. So we're going to do that now and then start prepping for paint. So the stuff cures pretty fast, but I'm going to let it sit for a while longer, mostly because of the seam sealer, because that's still kind of like spongy. It hasn't fully set, so it needs to get a lot harder, and then that stuff needs to cure on top of it as well. I think it came out all right. I think it looks a lot better than it did before, but there are a few things that I would definitely do differently if I do this again to make it look a little better and make it a little bit easier on myself. I am going to get this thing back on its wheels, but before I do that, I'm going to jack it up as high as it can go with my normal jack, and then once we get that, I'm going to measure to figure out how long I need to make these pin stands, or rather how tall I need to make them, because that's what's going to be next. But I want to get this thing back on its wheels, get it out of the garage, that way I can clean up in here and have more room to actually work on the pin stands. So it doesn't look too bad now that everything's on, it's back on the ground. Definitely looks better than the smashed up rocker panels before. I could have definitely made the seam look a lot cleaner if I had been able to weld all of it, but the gap was just way too huge up the top. So that's some stuff that I would change later on if I ever do this again on a different car. So one of the things that I would change is I wouldn't use angle iron. The angle iron made it extremely difficult to work with, and the only reason that I went with 3/16 angle iron, it's because it's the only thing that'll come in longer than a 2x2 section of angle iron. So that was an issue with that. I think that if I ever did this again, I would just get a sheet, probably like 12 gauge, 10 gauge, something like that. Probably not 10 gauge, that's pretty much 1/8 inch. Probably something a little bit thinner, 12 or 14 gauge, because that'd be thick enough. And then just buy a sheet, cut it to the size that I actually want it, and then form it around the rocker panel as I go. I think that would work a lot better. I would be able to get it a lot closer, so I wouldn't have to bridge gaps with welds, and I can weld that thing completely to the rocker panel instead of just stitching it in certain places like I ended up having to do. Now that wouldn't be as strong, but it would definitely protect the rocker panels and it would be much stronger. And if I did it that way, I would be able to wrap it around and actually tie it into the pinch welds on there, so therefore making it a lot stronger than it is. Because I wasn't able to tie it into the pinch welds, it's not as strong as it could be, because it will not serve as a jack point now because I wasn't able to tie it into that. So it'll still kind of like cave in the rocker panel a little bit, which good thing, 3/16 angle iron really doesn't have much flex to it at all, but it will have a little bit. So I did notice that when I tried to jack it up on that, is it actually started binding. You couldn't open the door. So I'm not even going to bother. I don't need that as a jack point anyway. I can just use the actual pin stand parts as the jack point and just pick up all 4 corners at once. But most of the time, if I'm going to be picking up the car from the side or whatever, it's going to be to change a flat on the side of the road. So we'll modify the jack to be able to go into the pin stand hole, and that'll make it a lot easier to change flats on the side of the road, and it'll make it a lot more stable because then it's not just riding on that pinch weld. Anyway, it was a long video. It took me a long time to film this. I'm going to push the car out now while I drive it, I guess. I got to make room for it since I got a full garage and driveway right now. And then we're going to start on the pin stands later once I clean up the garage some, so we can try to keep the garage in somewhat of a clean shape, because it's not too bad, just dirt everywhere. I'm going to leave the fenders off the car as well. That way, once I finish the pin stands, pull all the wheels off, and then just hose this thing down in the driveway to really clean up all that mud, because it's pretty bad still, and I really need to do a good job because it's going to sit for a little while before its next rally. So yeah, that's all I got for this one. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you stay tuned to see how I make the pin stands and how they come out.